abortion political? Okay. It's a long story, but we'll start with what the statistics that we have now. Polls are showing right now that abortion is one of the most divisive issues in this country when it comes to social issues. Same-sex marriage isn't even this divisive. Same-sex marriage actually is one of the least divisive issues in this country. It's almost 70-30 at this point. According to the latest polls taken last year, 70% of people are pro same-sex marriage and 30% obviously anti. So yeah, that used to be also one of the more divisive issues. But now it's abortion. Abortion is the extremely divisive issue in this country. Polls show, like I said, one of the most divisive social issues. 49% of people, as of 2020, are pro-choice. 47% are pro-life, and 5% are undecided. This is 2 percentage points we're talking about here. This is nothing. It's practically even. And the 5% could go, 2.5 here, 2.5 there. You're basically evening the score at that point. It's an incredibly, incredibly divisive issue. And I was thinking about why this is divisive. Where is it divisive? So you can divide the United States of America into like 4 pieces, right? You have the West Coast, you have the Midwest, you have the South, and you have the East Coast. The West Coast, the foundations of the West Coast, if you think about it, are socially liberal, right? Manifest destiny, driving out to the West to chart your own territory, to make your own way, make your own path, no rules. Like San Francisco in the 1840s, 1850s was a town of no rules. Like we were the original Las Vegas. What happens in San Francisco stays in San Francisco. I mean, you literally go back and read old history books. There were brothels in the street. It was just filled with miners who were trying to get it big with gold and all of these things. So, yeah, it's a big, it's a town. It was a town of no rules. And that's really what the West Coast population boom took place because of the gold rush. And because there were people just mass migrating here to start new lives and have no rules and have basically do whatever they want. And that's what the West Coast is built on. West Coast is built on being socially liberal. And San Francisco is arguably one of the most progressive cities in the world, right? So that makes sense. The West Coast tends to be more pro-choice. The East Coast, similar, right? I mean, the East Coast is, yes, more rooted in tradition. There's definitely more churches. They've been around for longer. You would expect them. They are slightly more conservative. They're not like the, hang loose, relax West Coast. It's more button up. It's more button down, kind of go to work type mentality. But it's the East Coast also tends to be liberal. You have a lot of big cities congregated in one area. And what happens when you have big cities? You tend to have more liberal people. So I'm talking, Boston. You have Boston, Philadelphia, New York City, and Washington, D.C. all within, 7 hours of each other? Yeah, you're going to have a lot of, liberal kind of, you're going to have a lot of, you're going to have a lot of liberal values within those areas. And that's, that comes with the territory. That's why you look at the East Coast and it's all blue, because you have major cities of finance and various things right there. And they're all congregated within a certain area. So the East Coast also tends to be more liberal. So the West Coast and the East Coast may be different in terms of mentality, but they're both, liberal when it comes to social issues. Then you have the Midwest. The Midwest is interesting. The Midwest kind of goes either way, right? And that's why you look at the Midwest and you're looking at the Midwest and you're like, holy crap, like they're always the deciding factor in these elections, because the coasts go blue, the South goes red. Where's the Midwest going? Because the Midwest has influences from everywhere. The Midwest has influences from the West. The Midwest has influences from the East and the South. So you kind of get this weird melting pot of people in the Midwest of like people who are socially conservative. It does tend to be a little bit more socially conservative, lean socially conservative in the Midwest. And, and so hence abortion is, looked down upon in that area of the country. Christianity is very popular in the Midwest and in the South. And of course you have to get to the South, which is, known as Republican territory. It's red, very conservative, very rooted in Christianity, all of these things. So different parts of the country have different mentalities, and we both live on coasts, and a lot of media outlets live on the coasts. So there is a lot of reporting in our ear that's like, oh, liberal, conservative, liberal. but no one really has a feel for what the middle of the country is like. And that is the key to this whole abortion puzzle, which is like, why is abortion political? Because let me get into this. This whole abortion being political goes back to the 1970s. And the Christian right. So the Christian right was basically this big group of people located mostly in the Midwest and the South who were originally Democrats. So for those of you that don't know, Democrats a were a very socially conservative party. They were pro-slavery in the 1800s. And they were very socially conservative for a long time. The Democrats were kind of the modern day quote unquote Republicans. I don't want to say they were the Republicans because they were pro-slavery and shit, but the Democrats have their own crazy history. And so they were, yeah, in the past they were, pro-slavery, and then they eventually, became more socially conservative. But as time went on, Democratic candidates became younger and they became more socially liberal, and they've basically formed into the modern day Democrats that you see today, right? And that started basically in the 60s with Kennedy. And, and he kind of flipped the script a little bit. And then you had Lyndon B. Johnson, who also flipped the script, with the Civil Rights Act and all the Voting Rights Acts. So Democrats are flipping more to the left. And a lot of people in the South were Democrats. They were called the Southern Democrats because they were very pro, being socially conservative and all of these things. And the Democrats were that. But when the Democrats started turning left, you have this whole group of Southern Democrats who, a lot of which are the Christian right, that have no political home. So they essentially kind of don't know where to go or where to vote. Then along came this guy by the name of Jerry Falwell in the 1970s. This is where he really started to gain notoriety. And he was basically like a celebrity TV/radio preacher. So basically he would preach sermons over the radio and present himself over the television, and deliver these sermons that were incredibly, Christian in nature and incredibly conservative in nature. And the Christian right tended to kind of follow him because he represented their values more so than, any of the political candidates at the time. And so he was the one that basically used his sermons to try to mobilize the Christian right and get them involved within politics. And so suddenly you have this huge group of Southern Democrats who were Democrats who don't really have a political home, that are kind of just following Falwell, who tended to be more conservative. So they ended up going to the Republicans. And the Christian right really brought their issues with them to the right. So what I mean by that is the Christian right had particular issues that they wanted to focus on, right? They weren't necessarily like, oh, like we're, war hawks, or like we're into deficit and this, that. They brought two main issues to the conversation, which were same-sex marriage, for the most part. Two main issues. Same-sex marriage, we're anti that. I'm talking about the Christian right. And pro-choice. Or sorry, pro-life. So those were the two issues that they were like, no, like we are anti-abortion, we are anti-same-sex marriage. And they basically brought that with them to the Republican Party. And so suddenly you are having these conversations about very socially, or you were having these conversations about social issues because the Christian right, which is a pretty big minority of Southern Democrats that were kind of left for dead, sort of moved to the Republican side. And now you're like, oh, it's, abortion is a thing. And you are talking about it more so than ever. And yeah, the Christian right continues obviously to exist today. You might have heard of them in 2016, the evangelicals, they were like very pro-Trump, all of these things. They, organized in all sorts of ways through grassroots. The media has also heavily assisted, there's a lot of Christian media that's heavily assisted them and mobilized them to have the power that they do today. And their messaging is everywhere. It's like you think of Westboro Baptist, like all of these things. It's literally because of the media that the Christian right is even relevant. And they're big. They were a big group, and I'm sure that they still are big. I don't really necessarily know the size, but the Christian right is still very much a relevant force in this country and a relevant minority force in this country, so that these issues are being talked about. Without the Christian right, I don't think you're necessarily talking about abortion or same-sex marriage in the way that you are, in the way that you did, in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, all of this stuff. So same-sex marriage and abortion were basically brought to the conversation because of the Christian right. And so why is abortion political? Well, one of the main reasons is the Christian right. And The Christian right, of course, has their, they stretch their messaging to all sorts of different areas of politics, whether that be, whatever values they may have. Death penalty is one of them and all of that stuff. But abortion is the main topic. Abortion is the number one topic that they basically have focused most of their energy towards and have really dialed in on, is abortion. So you're talking about religion. We talked a lot about the